Hey there, and welcome to today's video. So this one is going to be all about one of my very favorite functions in SQL Server, the format function, which makes it super easy to, you guessed it, format the data in your SQL query results however you need to. Let's dive right in. So as an analyst, you'll often find, ironically enough, that analyzing data is only part of your job. Another very important part of just about any analyst's job is presenting that data, often post-analysis to decision makers. And when you're presenting data to others, the format of that data can matter quite a lot. Imagine, for example, that an AdventureWorks executive wants to see the percentage markup for all the products the company sells. And here on my screen is the query to calculate just that. So here you can see that we're dividing the list price, the price the product is being sold at, by the product's cost, then subtracting 1 to get the percent increase. I'm also filtering out any records where the cost, the denominator in our little calculation, is 0 to avoid any divide by 0 errors. Now, technically speaking, the output of this query is exactly what was asked for. However, a lot of executives, and non-technical business folks for that matter, could potentially be confused by these strings of decimals over here in our derived markup column, where we were supposed to see percentages instead. Now, it's certainly possible for us to write some complicated series of nested SQL functions to convert a decimal number like 0.3513 to a percentage ourselves, but fortunately, there's a much easier way. SQL Server's built-in format function. So this format function is primarily used to convert numbers, and occasionally dates, into a specific string format. From my experience, it's especially useful for converting decimal numbers to percentages, like we're trying to do here, and for converting numeric values representing money, like total sales, total profit, bank account amounts, etc., into a currency-specific format. More on that in a bit. So to see how this format function works, let's make a copy of our derived markup column here, and I'll call this version Easy Markup. And now we're going to pass this little expression that calculates markup into the format function as its first argument. So we'll start here by saying format, and then our open parenthesis. And again, the first argument this format function takes is either a value or an expression that returns a value that we want to format in some specific way. And that brings us to the second argument, which is where we specify what that format is. Now, the values we pass to the second argument often take the form of formatting codes. So for example, instead of typing percentage, I'll simply type the letter P nested inside of quotes. SQL will then interpret that P to mean that we want to format the expression we passed as the first argument as a percentage. So let's type that P as the second argument, and then run our query again. And just like that, those unsightly strings of decimal numbers have all been converted to nice, readable percentages. Values that our business-oriented customers will be able to intuitively understand. Now, as another example of what the format function can do, let's say the same executive wants another ad hoc report listing all sales for April 5th, 2014. Now, to save us time, I'll paste in a starter query that does just that, and then run it. And like last time, our query does provide the requested data. But these dollar amounts in our second column here have no currency symbol before or after the value to indicate that the value does in fact represent money. Not to mention these long strings of numbers after many of the decimal places, when most people expect currency values to have at most 2 digits after the decimal. Now, as you may have guessed, we can once again use the format function to prettify, so to speak, these currency values in record time. So I'll add a new column to our query that I'll call formatted total due. And for this one, I'll again use the format function to apply a custom format to a numeric field in our data, this time the total due field from the sales order header table. So I'll say format, and then the first argument will just be that total due field. And then the format code for currency, as you might have guessed, is just a lowercase c. So now let's run this. And look at that. The format function automatically formats these numeric values as dollar amounts, with a dollar symbol before the values, commas used as thousand separators, and exactly 2 digits after each decimal. And it's worth calling out that SQL used a dollar symbol that is specific to US currency because SQL Server is smart enough to recognize that my system settings are based in the US. But what if the numbers don't represent US dollar amounts? What if, just for example, they were British pounds instead? Well, that's where the format function's optional third argument comes in. This argument allows you to specify the culture, or locale, to be used when formatting the value. This culture argument dictates how certain elements are presented, such as currency symbols, our current problem at hand, decimal and thousand separators, among others. These culture identifiers are often in the format language code hyphen country or region code. So for example, if I add a third argument to our format function here that goes EN, that's the language code for English, and then US, that's the country region code, with a hyphen separating the two, and then rerun our query, nothing changes, since our amounts were already being formatted US style. However, if I change that third argument to ENGB for English Great Britain, and then rerun our query, now our amounts in the third column are formatted as British pounds rather than American dollars. Just that easy. Now, of course, there are lots of these culture codes, just like there are lots of cultures around the world, and I wouldn't recommend trying to memorize them. These are pretty easy to look up in Microsoft's documentation, so as long as you know that you can format currencies and other values like dates or even plain old numbers in a culture-specific way using this third argument, you should be good to go. Now, speaking of dates, those are another fantastic application of the format function. So let's say that the person you're sending this data to isn't satisfied with the standard 4-digit year, 2-digit month, 2-digit day format that SQL Server returns date data as by default. Instead, perhaps they want those dates presented in another common format. 2-digit month, slash, not hyphen, 2-digit day, slash, 4-digit year. Quite a bit different from our current format. So how can we achieve this with the format function? Amazingly easily, that's how. All you have to do is specify the pattern of the date format you'd like to see. Kind of like when we used cast to convert text strings to dates. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and try to reformat this order date. So right below our current order date in our query, I'll create a new field called formatted order date. And I'll start the expression, of course, with the format function. And then I'll pass in our order date field as the first argument. And then for the second argument, I'll just specify the format of the date we'd like to see as a string. and that's just the 2-digit month, a slash, the 2-digit day, another slash, and the 4-digit year. Then I'll close out our parenthesis and run our query. So that almost worked, but the weird thing is we seem to be getting zeros for the months. So what's going on here? Well, you see, the format function allows us to format dates and times, which means we need to be able to represent components of those times, like hours, minutes, and seconds, in our format codes as well. And as a result, the format function interprets our here as minutes and not months. And since our dates here don't have a time component, we just got a 0 for every one. But what we're really interested in is how we get those months. Well, all we have to do to distinguish months from minutes is to change that piece of the format code from lowercase to uppercase That easy. So let's try that and then rerun our code. Nice. Worked like a charm. Now, there are obviously lots of ways you could go when it comes to formatting dates and times and currencies and so on using the format function. So once again, to determine the appropriate format code for a particular situation, I'd recommend that you refer to the official SQL Server documentation online, where you'll find a comprehensive list of format strings and their behaviors. Now, before we go, I do want to throw out one crucial caveat you'll want to remember when using the format function. And that is that its output is always a string, irrespective of the type of data we feed the function. So whether we give it a whole number, or a decimal number, or a date, or a string, the output will always be of a string data type. And this means that if the input was a date or a number, the output won't retain the original data type's properties. And as a result, if you need to perform further calculations or operations on that result, of the kind that you might perform on a number or a date, you might need to apply additional conversion or handling to that formatted string that the format function returns. For instance, if you format a date with format and then attempt to add days to it, you'll encounter an error because the formatted date is now a text value. Similarly, if you format a number as currency and then try to perform arithmetic operations, you'll be operating on a string, not a number. So addition and subtraction won't work the way you think. So in scenarios where subsequent operations are needed post-formatting, I'd recommend you retain the original value alongside the formatted one, or be prepared to convert the formatted string back to its original type if necessary. Okay, so that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another, and don't worry, another cute picture of one of my pets too, very soon. Have a great one.